Lorena? Welcome. Thank you for joining us to Media Literacy Micro-Credential, Evaluating Online Tools for Classroom Use. I'm Roger Manier from NWOET EdTech, and helping support us today is Deborah Brewer. Deb, say hi. All right, thanks so much for you. And also for Lori Pringle and Oelma, who started to really got this whole project off the ground. So today's session is really going to be talking about federal rules and regulations. It's not as bad as it sounds. Okay, it's not real exciting either, but it's not as bad as it sounds, because these really are rules, regulations, procedures that help keep kids safe. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and focusing on what you need to do to earn the micro-credential from KQED in this area. Welcome your questions. Those of you that are watching live, please feel free to type the question or even unmute and just ask the question verbally. I welcome you doing that. Those of you that are watching this recorded, welcome your phone calls and emails. And I will say, if you call the general number, the 800 number we'll give you at the end of this presentation. When you call that after the first time, I'll give you my personal cell phone number if we need to continue the conversation. So you will need to leave a message the first time you call, but then after that, you'll be able to text and call me directly. So just a way of cutting down on the spam a little bit. So federal rules and regulations specifically related to student safety and privacy. On many of these slides, you'll see a link to a website and additional resources. I encourage you, if you're watching this, log into your course and bring it up, watch the slide presentation along with me. My switching isn't working very well. I'm not being able to go to the full screen of the slides like I want to. So this will be by far easier, more enjoyable, more legible to you if you follow along with the slide presentation. So go to the course website, click on the slide presentation, and then follow along with me. And if you're watching this recorded, obviously, you can pause the recording, take a moment, bring up the slideshow, and that will really help you as you go along. And I'll try and make sure that I'm very clear what slide we're on in case you're having difficulty seeing it on my monitor here. So to earn a certificate for this micro-credential, there's 3 major tasks you have to do. And of the several different micro-credentials, the 8-9 different micro-credentials that are available, this is probably one of the easier ones in terms of what you actually have to do, but there's a fair amount of writing that goes along with that. And I'll try and explain that along the way. The first section, same thing as you have, I think every single micro-credential starts out with this. So when they're evaluating what you submit to earn the micro-credential, you give an overview. What grade level you teach, what's your teaching experience, what students are you like, what content area you teach. Same thing as you've seen in every other micro-credential. I don't see why you can't just copy and paste one that you did from an early one. Should be fine. The second thing you need to do is analyze alphabet soup. As FERPA, COPA, SIPA, and FERPA. These are the 4 different federal programs that really relate and regulate students' experiences online. And we'll talk about what each of these means in a little bit of detail. And then finally, we'll talk very briefly this week and then more in next week's session about evaluating through tools that you use to see if they're following FERPA, COPA, SIPA, and FERPA. I don't know, it sounds like a new singing group or something. If I was a little bit more creative, I would have had some background images of a weird looking rock band or something. So that's what you need to earn a certificate. Your overview questions, get an analysis, and I'll explain what analysis means in terms of the micro-credential of these 4 major federal laws, and then evaluating online tools that you use to see if they seem to be in compliance with the laws. Number 1, what's a FERPA? reminds me of a furry little creature that you might see on Star Wars or something, but no, that's not what they mean for this. It stands for Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. A big, long-winded and very lengthy law. Some of you may have the privilege of taking an online course, the same kind of courses where you take blood-borne pathogens and fire extinguisher safety and so forth. Some of you may be assigned a course in FERPA. It's one of the more common ones that districts require that teachers take in Ohio. And it's essentially says parents have the right to see educational records and imposes some pretty strict limits on the kind of information a school can release about your students. If you remember somewhere along the line in a workshop or training or professional development, something talking about the different types of records and directory information, which is the kind of information you might see in a yearbook or something, what class, freshman, sophomore, junior, third grade, whatever students are in. This FERPA relates to that. The good news is FERPA usually does not apply to the kind of records that classroom teachers usually create. Now, you can get in a little bit of trouble sometimes with putting information up on the web related to FERPA. And we can talk about that a little bit. Be glad to answer your questions you might have on that. But basically, if you're creating a test, you're creating a worksheet, you're doing something that's within the academic content, and the only people using that or relating to that information are you, your aides and those directly instructing the student in the classroom, then you don't have to worry about FERPA if the materials and resources are directly related to your instruction in the classroom, and that information doesn't go anyplace beyond your classroom, other than perhaps showing up as a letter grade somewhere down the road. So a little bit later on, that's going to be what impact does each of these laws have to your personal situation, to you, your students, and your students' family. Well, for FERPA, the families have a right to see the educational records that a school maintains. But for you as a teacher in a classroom, probably won't impact you a whole lot. If you have building-wide responsibilities or district-wide responsibilities, if you see students from multiple courses, multiple classes, and so forth, then the FERPA records might apply. To find out more about FERPA, I've given you two websites. One is the U.S. Department of Education website. We'll take a look at all of these websites sequentially, just one website after another, a little bit later on in my presentation today for you. And there's another one, which I think really does a pretty good job of explaining FERPA. And it's by a company that makes an app that is subject to the FERPA regulations. And again, we'll take up both of those a little bit later. So FERPA, educational records. If you see a multiple choice quiz or something someplace, it relates to records about a student. COPA. This is one that we hear a lot about. It's sometimes in the nightly news and magazine articles and blogs and so forth. COPA is the one about privacy and websites. And this is the one that, in my opinion, a classroom teacher or building or a district, honestly, this is the one that you're most likely to get in trouble for, because there's a lot of misunderstandings about what is and is not allowed, what information you can and cannot collect. First thing to know is if the student is 13 or over, age 13 or over, COPA doesn't apply to them. So for those of you teaching high school, you can say, does not apply to my students. All of them are age 13 or older, and you're ready to move on to the next topic. For those of us that do work with kids under the age of 13, and so again, what does that mean, 13 and under? No, if the day you turn 13, the students no longer have the protection of COPA. They no longer have the requirements of COPA. By the way, this is why almost all social media websites, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, you name it, almost all of the websites say only available to users age 13 and older. It's because those websites do not want, and apps do not want to be subject to the requirements of COPA, which are really very, very strict in terms of making sure you do not reveal any personally identifiable information about students, even general data that you might collect. You have to be extremely careful. Like, well, what would you collect if I don't have the name or the age or anything of the student? Like, how many times did they answer a math question wrong? What level are they at in a math game? Even information like that, if they're under the age of 13, you might get in trouble if you release that information in any fashion outside of the classroom. How do companies use COPA? Well, almost every commercial online program, with some exceptions, gathers data about their users. And they take some of that data, and here's a real example. So that there's a game, an app, an educational app that you can get for cell phones, iPads, Chromebooks, etc. Works on almost everything, and it's for math, and it's to help teach students math skills, and it's pretty good, really. And I'm not going to say the name of it, but it collects data about how the student's doing in those math skills. And to sign up for that, you have to have an email address to sign up for it. And depending on how you're doing on those math skills, you might get an email from the company saying, hey, you look like a whiz at math. Why don't you take our math accelerator, available for only $9.95 a month? Or going the other way, it says, wow, you look like you're really terrible at math. You should, and I'm going to make this name up, you probably can benefit from some tutoring from Bunky's Learning Center. So, click here to find the location of the nearest tutor available in your area. So they were taking the information that students were leaving behind, if you will, as they tried the different math problems. It was taking that information and use it to market to the students and or their parents. So that is not okay. You can't take, if the student is under 13 years of age, unless the parent gives their permission, you cannot collect this kind of data and then use it for marketing purposes. Now, if you're using an app in the classroom with your students for academic reasons, and that information does not go beyond your classroom, that's okay. But is the information ever going beyond your classroom or not? That is the question. And we'll talk more about how to get the answer to that question in a little bit. SIPA. That sounds like some nasty disease you don't want to get in this place. I like FERPA better. I think of a cute little furry creature. SIPA, however, is a good thing. And it is the one that impacts school buildings and districts to a very large extent, because this is why you have to have an internet safety policy. And hopefully you don't just have a policy, but it's an active living document that you really do review with students in a way that they can understand, not say, here, read it. And this is a true story. I was working with a district. I spend a lot of my time in internet safety, bullying, how to help districts and students, both select software resources and dealing with incidents and bullying and so forth. That's not the majority of my work by any means, but it's part of what I do. So in terms of internet safety, a district had some issues. They had some kids that were behaving badly online, frankly. And so they said, okay, we got to redo our internet safety policy. And so they had a team and they got together and they put about, I can still see this thing on the table, it was about an 8-page document. I had covered everything in the entire world that anybody could ever do wrong with internet safety. And so I volunteered on the committee. I said, well, how about I go through this and I want to see if everything looks good. And so I made some changes to the policy. I put in nonsensical or things that you would never, ever allow. Students should be allowed free use of the internet with no monitoring. Students should be allowed to upload and download photographs of any type taken any place. Things like that absolutely would violate any reasonable internet policy. So I scattered about a half dozen of those throughout the document. And I handed out the document to the committee, sent it to them electronically in advance, and said, here, I made a few changes. Look through it and see if there's anything that you feel is of concern. Otherwise, I think we're ready to sign this and move it on to the Board of Education for their approval. Every person in that committee signed off saying this was an acceptable policy. With all of those highly inappropriate recommendations. My point is, and this is kind of long-winded, but I think it's an important one. That's why I spent this much time on it. My point is, most people do not read internet safety policies. Most students don't, most teachers don't, most parents don't. They do not read them. So we have to, if we really care about kids being safe online, we must go beyond posting an internet safety policy that no one reads and teach the kids internet safety. Now, if you'd like to know more about that, I'd be glad to talk with you about that, share some different types of information. But the essence of it is, don't do anything online that you wouldn't do face-to-face. It's kind of the golden rule of internet safety. If you wouldn't do it face-to-face in front of your parents, in front of your principal, then don't do it online and you're going to be fine. All right, internet safety policy. SIPA, Children's Internet Protection Act, requires that we teach about and have policies regarding students' access to online information and to behavior. So you'll a lot of times hear librarians or others that are involved with working on online information resources, things like InfoHile, for example, taking a look at what is the type of information and how do we make sure that it's information that's appropriate for students. Yeah, they can get information in a lot of different places, but at least when they're in school, working on school assignments, working on school devices, that we're going to keep them as safe as it is possible. So we start with internet safety policy as our guiding document, and then we teach online safety. We teach about privacy and what kind of information we share and don't share. And I've got a story about online privacy too. I hope I don't bore you. I hope these help make this content meaningful and help us to understand why it's so important to have this. Privacy. This just happened over this past Christmas break. So a friend was going to be gone for a number of days visiting relatives, and they posted up on their Facebook page, can't wait to go to Philadelphia, going to be seeing friends there. I'll miss being home at Christmas, but our entire family is going to be gone. Well, you might as well just put a little sign up there that says, please come rob my house. You don't want to put that kind of personal information online. You don't want to have information that could put you, your family, your home, your children in jeopardy. So, and it's tough. It is really, really difficult to keep things private and yet still have the kind of social experiences we want to have online. So again, I encourage you, the golden rule of online safety, is this something I would say in front of my principal? Is this something I would say, in the case of I'm going on vacation someplace, is this something I would go to the mall or stand up in church and say, hey, folks, I'm going to be gone for the next several days and there's nobody watching my house. Or Jimmy, he's isolated from COVID, so he's going to be home alone all day while the rest of us are at work. Think about, who could somebody who's not well-intentioned, how could they make use of the information you're sharing online, and then don't do it. In school, we want to make sure that we respect students' privacies, families' privacies, and our own as teachers, as educators, that we're protecting our own privacy as well. What you teach, exactly how you teach it, it's going to vary by grade level, obviously, the maturity of the students and the kind of content they're getting in. But we do need to teach it. Something that you probably are well aware of, most of us as educators have probably had to take a course in phishing, how to be careful of emails that are asking for personal information. If they say, you've won $1 million, just type in your bank account to have your first deposit made. Yeah, that's a bit of a warning sign. So that's all part of privacy as well. So SIPA, Children's Internet Protection Act, involves, teaching kids about online safety, teaching them about privacy. And finally, part of the SIPA is that we monitor what students are doing in school, and the practical application of this is filtering. Internet filtering is a good idea. It's not perfect. And I always encourage parents to use internet filtering at home. When they're using school devices, almost all internet filtering that works at school also works on the school device when at home. The kids aren't always on the school device. So internet filtering is, to keep at least the worst of the software, the worst of the images away. And you may have heard about some new changes that are coming out in some of the social media apps through Google and other resources, other online tools that are going to help alert parents and kids if there is content that appears to be harmful. So that's a good step in the right direction. So SIPA, Internet Safety Policies, teaching online safety and privacy, and monitoring the use of filtering. This is for all students under the age of 18 until they become an adult. And so this will have, to a greater or lesser extent, some impact in almost everyone's classroom. And I encourage you, when you're working towards submission of your credential, when you submit, mention a little bit about how filtering impacts you. And many of us will have some stories to tell about things that got filtered that we did not want to, it was a website that we had a very legitimate reason to access, that as educators and as students, we needed to go to that website to see information. And then, so usually you can turn, to your building principal or your tech coordinator, you turn in a request and say, I need this website unblocked, and I need it unblocked temporarily or permanently so I can have access to this, that, and the other thing. So that's one of the things that you may want to mention or talk a little bit about in terms of how filtering works. And also, if you have any stories to, and by the way, I misspoke a moment ago. I said 18. It is under the age of 17. Under the age of 17. So the previous one, COPA, under the age of 13, and SIPA under the age of 17 is where these apply. FERPA. Oh my gosh, thank goodness we're getting through these things. Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment. This relates to surveys and physical exams, like medical exams. How they get online kind of information, internet, and physical exams thrown into the same law. I don't know, that's Congress for you. And honestly, I think, in my opinion, and I'll always try and just differentiate Roger's opinion from established fact, government regulation, policy, and so forth. In my opinion, these are probably good laws. Probably all of these are very appropriate, maybe not always worded exactly right, maybe not always implemented in the best possible way, but good things to have, good reminders and good starting points to keeping our kids safe in the internet world. And these laws, for the most part, aren't new. There's been changes to them over the years, but date back 20 years or more at this point in time. So, so even though the information or the specifics might be new to you, the laws themselves are not. And if you're hearing more about these online through some of the changes being made, for example, the alerts for parents and kids that this content may be inappropriate, if you're hearing more about them, I think it's because we're finally understanding there are things that kids shouldn't see. There are things that kids shouldn't hear. There are certainly things that kids shouldn't do. And because it's so easy to get that information and that access, and so easy to share information online, I think it's bubbling to the surface is, yeah, we really do have to take more action here. Now, everybody wants you to do more in your classroom. Everybody, from the Peanut Butter Association to the Grape Growers Association, to the food drive, to the STEM career, to the coding for kids. Everybody wants you to teach something new in your classroom. The time we have with our kids is precious, and we need to make sure that we're spending it wisely. I'm not even going to call that Roger's opinion. I'm going to call that a fact. Keeping kids safe is the number one thing. If they're not safe, if they're not secure, nothing else we do matters. And internet safety is a big deal. So I hope that you will be doing your part, and I hope you will see how these federal laws and regulations help us. They're a starting point. They're not the end, but a starting point to keeping safe online. So FERPA, surveys. This is one that districts can get into trouble with, individual teachers can get in trouble with. It requires you to have parental consent if you're gathering information in a survey. Now, so that we have this COPA, which relates to students under the age of 13. That's very, very strict. The survey is much broader and applies to all students who are not yet adults. Parents must give consent before students take a survey, not just give consent for the release of information, but give consent before students are given a survey that has questions related to health, sex, income, religion, lifestyle kind of questions, life choice questions, opinion sort of questions. If it doesn't directly relate to academic content, then you probably need to have parental consent before the student fills out that survey. And you most certainly need to make very sure that you have consent before you would release any information beyond that available directly to the classroom teachers. And Deb, do you want to jump in? Do you want to share your example of your survey, or would you rather not that you were dealing with?
No, I'm sorry, I'm on two different cameras here. Roger and I were going through this morning, and I was telling him, first of all, this is something I really need to learn more about anyway, especially now working with the television station, because we're actually putting kids' work on a different level than just sharing within my classroom. But I'm just curious because we partnered with the Appalachian Studies class, and they gave a survey out to all these classes, all these students in these classes that are doing our documentary film project. And after talking to Roger this morning, I'm like, I wonder if we have the correct permissions to have done that. My hope is that we worked with a research person at the university and that they did do all that, but it just made me really stop to think that before we do anything else like that we need to pay attention to that. I don't know if do you guys do surveys that go beyond like who likes what kind of pop or something?
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, this sounds sort of dumb, but even what flavor pop do you want? Do you like salads rather than hamburgers? Unless you're doing that in a nutrition or health related class, that would fall under this, because it's, unless those questions directly relate to a graded curriculum, you have to get the okay, not even to release the results, but just to get the survey. And for the best of intentions, we ask kids questions about all sorts of things, drug use, sexual behavior, how do you deal with stress? There's a lot of things that really can help us as educators. It can help community groups, reach out to kids. Do you like to play baseball? What's the harm in that? Well, I can't imagine what the harm is, but if it's not relating to an academic content behavior and it's a school-age child, we got to get the okay before we give that survey out, and certainly before we would share any information beyond the classroom teacher. So, any other thoughts? Or I'll bake a file in the cake when we get you out of jail for this survey that you handed out. So, and you do sometimes get parents objecting to surveys and their child being asked to share information. And honestly, sometimes it's information that they would willingly share, or they might even already have posted on their Facebook page. But when the school asks it, So surveys, physical exams. That is, let's see. And looks like a question, Bessa. Questions about religion and so forth. So if it's related to the content you're teaching, with very few exceptions, if you are specifically and if I'm in a religious school, Catholic, Lutheran, Baptist, whatever, if I'm teaching in a school that is sponsored by or oriented around religious education, then of course it's going to be okay to ask questions about religion, because that's, I assume, at least, I hope, that's part of your curriculum. So you're going to be fine. If it's a question related to your curriculum, you're going to be fine and dandy. If a student is enrolled in a physical education course, and that's where the survey about, do you like baseball, football, or badminton better, and it's related to that physical education course, you're going to be fine, because it's directly related to the content area. Full disclosure, I'm not an attorney. I do not represent the et cetera, et cetera. But my understanding of the laws are, you're going to be totally fine and dandy within your curriculum area. Now, I can't imagine this being the case, but if you're teaching in a Catholic school or whatever, and you did not have any curriculum related to teaching Catholicism or whatever the religion might be, if you didn't have a curriculum, if you didn't have a course, or if it wasn't stated as being included as part of the content, yeah, then you can't. So good question. What's the the man on the streets test is this something I'm teaching as part of a graded course of study? And if it is, it's probably going to be fine to ask.
And do these rules change because of a private institution, or are there differences? And are these just public school restrictions?
That is a super question. Thank you. I look next on my question list. No, I mean, I couldn't have done better if I asked you that.
Oh, good.
So, yeah. So almost all of these rules apply specifically to educational institutions that receive federal funding in almost any way. And you can go into the nitty-gritty of the rule and see what the specifications are. But for example, if you receive any type of federal support for internet, E-rate, anything like that, then all of the internet safety rules apply. These rules are not limited to K-12 education, however. So for the most part, let's say you coach, has nothing to do with school whatsoever, but you coach a soccer club or badminton clinic or whatever you can say. If for the most part, these rules are going to apply to you in those situations as well. There are exceptions. There are private club, private organization opt-outs, and certainly, I believe in every case, parents have the ability to give you the right to perform these activities. So, parents can certainly say, yes, you're welcome to survey my student on anything you want to. That might be a little bit too broad, but so the parents remain in control of the student's information, and whether that's information coming from the student to be shared outside of the classroom, or whether it's information that's going to be given to the student from the internet, for example. That's where we get to the porn sites and other types of internet filtering, whether it's information the student is receiving or going out, and in particular, information that in any way, shape, or form is being provided electronically by the internet, by cell phone, by apps, and so forth, websites. That's when these rules apply. So for the most part, they're going to apply. And even if, Roger's opinion on this one, even if this rule doesn't apply to you because of some unique circumstance, here's my private club, whatever, you would be well advised to still think about them and say, hey, maybe I shouldn't, and I'll go with internet filtering for a moment. So maybe I'm putting together a teen center. We get no federal money in any way, shape, or form. And so you probably are not going to be required to have internet filtering software on computers that you have at your teen center. But you're probably going to want that internet filtering software, even though you might not be required to have it. I'd welcome additional questions, online, by email, by phone, regarding this. So really good point. Thank you. Physical exams, I didn't finish up on that. In general, parents must consent before students are given a physical exam. There are, as you might expect, exemptions for emergency treatment and so on and so forth. Or if state or federal law requires the exam, you'll oftentimes see this particular component of FERPA come out in a form that if you're participating in any form of athletics at school, you'll get a form that says my child has to be examined by a doctor, and there may be periodic exams for hoof and mouth disease or fungus of the toes or whatever. Not hoof and mouth disease, but the toe fungus is a legitimate thing that, it's like, yes, I give consent. If you're wrestling, we're periodically going to examine or have a qualified medical professional doing an examination to make sure that your children are safe, and both for themselves and for others to participate. So physical exams and surveys, that's what FERPA is all about. So that is the overview of FERPA, COPA, SIPA, and FERPA. And to earn your certificate, first thing you have to do, excuse me, is those overview questions about your grade level, what you teach, and so forth. Same thing that you have for every one of these micro-credentials. The second thing you need to do is submit an analysis of these 4 federal laws. So what do they mean by analysis? Well, Roger's opinion, the good folks that put together this micro-credential went a little bit overboard on how much detail they're asking for. But for each law individually, when you submit the information to earn your micro-credential, for each law, what is the purpose and how's it going to impact the design of instruction? Now, I tried to give you at least the first part of this in my slide presentation, and to talk a little bit about some of the ways it might impact how you design instruction. So for example, if it's COPA, and the children that you are working with are age 13 and older, doesn't impact me at all. But you still have to explain it as part of what you submit to the micro-credential. Explain it, how it impacts the choices you might make in terms of software, apps, in classroom activities, and then reflect. So the first 2 are very factual. This is the way it is. Not a matter of opinion. This is a statement of fact. Here's a statement of fact that, at least in my classroom, this is how it's going to impact my choice of software. Pro hint here. I'm going to make sure my software is compliant with FERPA. They probably are looking for a little bit more information than that, but that's the essence of that second bullet point is, I got to make sure that I got to take a look at the software and I got to see if it's compliant with FERPA. And it might mean that some programs that I otherwise might choose are not going to be selected or not going to be assigned for student activity because it's not compliant with FERPA or COPA or SIPA or FERPA. And finally, how can you be sure that you're in compliance? That's a tough one. Even experts in the field, and I mean true high-level experts, when they look at some of the websites and educational applications and so forth, sometimes it's very, very clear that they're not in compliance. But more often, there's kind of a gray area. So what would definitely not be in compliance? Facebook. It shares information. It uses your information. It targets advertising based on the information you provide. Google, if you're using, not within the classroom, the Google that is used in school is very tight on not targeting advertising based on what you're doing within school. But when you use Google outside of school, rather than your school Google account, if you go sign up for just your basic google.com, roger@google.com, when you sign up for those, they use very targeted advertising. Every time I do a search, they know what I've searched for. And if you're using voice, the voice recognition software, that's doing it as well. So those are, Alexis is probably not even close to being compliant for these, as are many, many other software programs. So how can you ensure you're in compliance? It's tough, it's difficult, but the first place to start is looking at the application itself, at the app that's on your cell phone or your tablet or your Chromebook or whatever, or the software that's going to be on the website. Look at that app itself and see, does it say it's compliance? Now, many districts maintain a compliance list. So that's one of the things you can check on it. And you may wish to do that as part of this course you're in right now. Just shoot a quick email or to your tech coordinator or your principal, whatever the procedure you might have for your district or your building to getting to the tech gurus, and say, hey, do we have a list of programs that have been identified as being federally compliant? I know I'm okay with using them. For the purpose of this course, you don't have to have that list. So don't say, oh, you got to make one or I'm going to fail. No, it's not true at all. But just, is there a list? And if there is, I can scan through. And if the app or website I'm using is on that list, I know I'm good to go. So if you're using a resource from InfoHio, for example, you're good to go. Those are looked at very carefully. They are compliant with the federal regulations. If you're looking at something that you got a free trial from, maybe yes, maybe no. So how can I be sure if I'm in compliance? First off, I look and see if my district's in compliance or has a list. And I'll see if that's on that list. And hopefully I can trust that list to be accurate. The second way is to look at the website itself and see what its terms of use and its privacy policy is. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that tonight and a lot more, somewhat more about it next week as well. So see what my district says are software resources, apps, and websites that have been identified as being compliant. And secondly, look at the resource itself. You're going to look for the terms of use and their privacy policies. All right. So, which brings us a little bit more till next week, where we're going to be looking at evaluating 3 online tools where, whether they're on your list from your district or not, you're going to evaluate those tools to see if they are compliant. And this will be part of what you need to submit to get to earn your micro-credential as well, is the evaluation of these online tools. So this is your assignment. When you join us next week, pick 3 online resources, look for their privacy and terms of use statements. And I hope that you'll share with me. I hope we'll have a lot of people live online next week, and you can share some of the best and worst examples of privacy policies, and some of the best and worst examples for other aspects of internet safety, internet filtering, and so forth. There's a lot of different evaluations, and that's the last thing we're going to do this evening, is take a look at one or two of the models that are out there for evaluating websites. We're also going to take a tour of each of the different websites that have been mentioned in this slide presentation, so you know what to look for as you go to these websites to get more information to complete what the materials that you'll need to submit in order to earn your micro-credentials. Now, again, you're not going to need to submit anything. I welcome you to. I'm glad to take a look at things and answer your questions. I'm very, very delighted to help you out with questions you might have related to anything internet safety and privacy that you might be dealing with. But to earn the micro-credential is where you have to submit anything. You don't have to submit anything to me, except a very brief quiz we're going to talk about in just a moment. So with that being said, here comes the tour of websites that are listed on the slides. Oops, here we go. So the first off, and here's the super pro tip. I know Deb mentioned it in her class a couple months ago. Lori mentioned it in the instruction that she provided, and I'll mention it one more time, that if you go to the micro-credential website, the KQED, there is an option to print the content for today's class. And it's not my presentation. This is the materials that they have put together. And it includes the components, what you're required to submit. There's more information about this analysis of privacy laws, more information about evaluating terms of service. So that is you will find that these are in order as they come on the website, on the slides, as you go through my slide presentation, the links that are at the bottom. And by the way, they had a problem with the actual linking. So if you click on the link and it doesn't, click, copy and paste, or do a web search, and it should come up okay. But I'm going to go back in there and try and make sure that the slides are all clickable as well. So evaluating online tools for classroom use, the printable version, and the link to that printable version is on, I believe it's the second or third slide in this series. Also, from the U.S. Department of Education, anybody from US DOE listening? And I actually, well, I don't know them. I've had the privilege of meeting and talking with several of the folks at the US Department of Education, with a committee I was on a couple years ago. And there's some really smart, sharp minds there. Roger's opinion, those sharp, really good, expert educators, what they knew didn't get to these websites. I'm sorry. So yeah, go ahead, take a look at the Department of Education websites. Those are the official, it's as official as you can get regarding information on the FERPA and COPA and the federal regulations and so forth. But yeah, take a quick look. If you don't quite understand them, join millions of others, and then you move to a different resource, which you can go. So here's an example. Here is kind of a plain language, makes sense to me definition of FERPA. And this is actually in a company. And I don't recommend nor disrecommend. This particular company, I've never used their product personally, though I am aware of schools that have used it successfully. But it's a company called Remind. And what it is a communication tool designed to improve information between the school and students and parents. Well, you got communication going back and forth that involves students. That definitely shouts out that I have COPA liability if the students are under age 13, and I probably am going, when I say liability, responsibility, I should really say, to make sure I'm in compliance and doing all the things right. So this company put together, their policies so you can see what it means. So that again, if you're going through the slides, That's from help.remind.com is the beginning of that web URL, and a pretty good layman's practical explanation of what FERPA is. And I think FERPA might be one of the more difficult policies to understand, at least in my opinion. COPA, Common Sense Education. Their website, I recommend it without question on almost anything related to online. Good people, they know what they're doing, and very importantly, they know how to explain it in a way that makes sense to me. So if I go there, and if you have trouble for whatever reason the works aren't linking, for the internet safety, privacy, cyberbullying, anything helping to keep students safe and productive, learning their, meeting their learning objectives as well. Common Sense Education is a great place to go to. And this particular one is one of their series of articles, and it talks about COPA and specifically what teachers need to know about that law. And the short version, again, remember, is this is one where you need to get parental consent before you collect individual information about students. Next is SIPA. This resource also comes from Common Sense Education, and it talks a little bit about SIPA, you may remember, that's the one where we have to have an internet safety policy. We have to teach about appropriate online behavior, safety, privacy, and cyberbullying. That's all part of COPA, and that is something that even if you aren't required to follow the SIPA, even if you're not required to follow SIPA, if you're involved with helping getting students online for seeking information, for doing research, I encourage you to accept responsibility for teaching them about appropriate online behavior, privacy, and especially cyberbullying, how to avoid it, what to do when it happens to you. Here is an example of an evaluation tool. Remember your assignment for next week. Pick 3 online resources. They can be the same resources. They can be the exact same resources that you've used for some previous assignments, previous micro-credentials. That's fine. And you'll have some of the work already finished up, already ready for you. And you may have heard me mentioning as I chimed in the first and second course in this series that, take a look at those, find the terms of use, find the privacy statements, and see what they say. So here's a model for evaluating the privacy of a particular tool called Nearpod. It's an app. A lot of teachers use it. It's very popular. There's a lot of good things about Nearpod. We teach it here at NWOET. I think most of our agencies, offer courses or online videos on how to use Nearpod. It's a great resource, but it's not so hot when it comes to online privacy. It's one that you have to be a little bit careful of. And so here is Common Sense Media. Now, my point in sharing this particular website, though, my point in sharing this website isn't to scare you off from watching Nearpod, but rather, what do I look for when I'm looking at the tools I use? Seesaw, TikTok, Facebook, I hope not. And when I'm looking at the tools that I use with my students, what should I look at to see if they're safe and to see if they protect privacy? And so what data does it collect? What data does it share? And who does it share it with? Does it keep my data secure? What kind of rights do I have as a parent or as an adult? Do I have a right to have that data erased if I want? Do I have a right to receive a copy of the information they're collecting on me? These are important questions to ask. Do they sell the data? Are they going to take this? Remember, I gave an example of a program where it would sell, actually it took the information and it would sell the information to companies so that they could market to the family saying, hey, your kids did poorly on this math test, Why don't you buy this product so they can do better? Or your kid did great on this math test. Why don't you do this product to help them prepare for college? Is it being sold? And take a look at what it says about that. And is it safe? What kind of online interactions does it permit? Will it let students who don't know each other or children who do not know each other interact with each other? And I'll tell you folks, and I know it's a struggle, and I know I'm going to sound like, the sky is falling sort of a thing, but many of these online gaming platforms, Fortnite and many, many others, my gosh, they're downright scary in terms of what they allow students to communicate with people where they've got no idea of how old the student or how old the people they're communicating with, or what the real intention of the people they're communicating with. So we need to watch out for our kids. We can't control them. We can't watch them as educators every minute of the day, but we can at least work very hard to make sure that when they're communicating with others through an app or a website that I am giving assignments to, that those communications are in fact safe and secure. Ads, is it going to give the students ad, or do the ads pop up based on how the student has been performing, or the way they ask question? And can parents provide consent for the information that's being collected? And can parents provide consent and withdraw consent and say, I want you to take all that data, erase it, and never do anything with it again? What kind of control do you have all your data? And for schools, if you're making purchase decisions for schools, it's the same thing. So maybe you have an app, it's fully compliant with all the federal regulations, and they're going to collect data, but it's going to be used to keep information, provide information to your teachers to do a better job of teaching. But down the road a few years, you decide, you know what, we no longer want this program, or we no longer want this app. Do you as a school have, first off, it's, the local parentis, do you have a right to collect that information? I'm sorry, to see what information the company has collected on your students and your teachers and their performances? And I was at a conference one time, and they had, big display up showing how each of the different schools that use that program, how much they had improved. Did they ask the school? I mean, there were names of districts and things. Did they ask the school before they posted that at their booth, trying to sell their program, of course? So at this big conference, did they ask the school before they posted them, hey, is it okay if I share your information? And do I, as a school, do I really want my school listed if they say, here's the top 25%, but my school's the last one in the list? What is the company going to do with the information from my school? Do I, as a school, have control over that information? And do I have as a school, have the right to say that information will be deleted when I no longer need it, or when we no longer choose to use your product? So again, those are not the kind of choices that most of us at the classroom level or the librarian level are going to have to be making. But you may encounter it. It's something to know. So I've spent a long time on this. This is one of several models on how do I evaluate an online resource. The printed KQED information I mentioned a few minutes ago, that has some different recommendations for how to evaluate online resources. And you may make up your own set of criteria, put together a table where here's the criteria I'm going to be using to evaluate online resources. Here's the 3 resources, going across, and, fill that table out. That's okay too. But how are you going to evaluate online resource? Think about that a little bit. It's a question I'm going to be asking you next week is, what are you thinking about using for evaluating the online resources that you're going to submit to earn your micro-credential? Oops, here we go. So we are just about at the end of today. We're going to end up a few minutes early, I think. If you take a look here, so in terms of the presentation materials, again, the slides with the websites that I'm recommending you take a look at are in session resource number 1. Here are some additional resources that might be handy to you. And finally, down at the bottom, a little bit more information on resources to help you evaluate the terms of service. Now, terms of service, the privacy and safety that the company is going to have. I thank you for joining you. We're going to stop the recording in just a couple minutes and then leave some time available for those of you that are present live online to ask additional questions and specific discussions. Those of you that are watching this recorded, let me remind you that you will need to, oops, there we go, bring that back, maybe. Let me remind you that to verify you have watched this, there we go, maybe, here I go. You will have to go into Teacher Campus, answer a quiz to verify that you participated in this January 4th Evaluating Online Tools session. So 2 assignments, one of which is to take a look at some online resources, pick 3 of them that you're going to evaluate for their terms of service and privacy issues. And we'll talk about them in next week's session, a week from today, on Tuesday. And then, but before you do that, make sure you log into the course if you have not already done so, and scroll down, make sure you answer the quiz to verify that you participated and watched this January 4th Evaluating Online Tools session. I thank you very much for participating. Deb, any additional instructions or things? She's the expert here in terms of running these classes.
Lori is the Teacher Campus expert. But again, remember you have to click the box in each, click the continue box in each section so that it shows that you did it. Once you've done all of them, then you can answer the quiz. And also you can register for the work session too.
Yeah.
So yeah, you guys have been on for a while, so you probably have those pieces figured out. I don't know.
Yep. Yes. So here I took a look at the resources and I continue, and there we go. And you have to register and so on and so forth. And you just click on through and eventually you get to the quiz. If you have any problems with that, contact us. And I'm going to bring that email up and contact information one more time. Let's see if I can get that a little larger.
And the link to that presentation is in the course too, so you can click directly on the whole presentation as well.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm Roger Minier, M as in mother, I, N as in Nancy, IER, at N as in Nancy, WO is in Edgar, T as in Tom.org, Minier at NWOET.org, or call 800-96 966-9638. Say that again, 800-966-9638, which is also very cleverly 800-96-NWOET. Remember, if you call, you'll have to leave a message. I'll call or text you back. And then at that point, you'll have my personal cell phone. You only have to leave a message once. Afterwards, we'll be able to directly call or text each other, whichever you prefer. So thank you for watching. Internet safety, the federal laws get a little bit dense at sometimes, but they really do help us protect our kids. So thank you very much. And we'll end the recording. And then those of you that are live will stick around a little bit to speak with you directly and answer questions you may have. Thank you.
Okay.